The triple build packs give new support and new life to older Rush Duel themes, and its newest iteration, Evolution Impact, is no different. The powerful Red Eyes Black Dragon get their very own maximum monster, giving the deck more destructive capabilities. Dinosaurs already had a maximum monster, but now you can interchange the parts to have even more powerful effects and stronger synergies. However, today's video is about the third theme of this set, one that's had very little representation in Rush Duel, only having a handful of cards to give us a glimpse of its power. Now, the Delirium Insects have made their full debut and they're ready to take your monsters and your life points. Hello everyone, my name is Protagonist, you can call me Protag, and I'm back with another episode of Rush Review. This is a series where I go over decks and themes to help introduce them to people who might want to learn about Rush, or for those who might want to try something new. Today's episode is about the Delirium theme, light insects that can change your opponent's monsters to insect type, allowing them to be used as material for the fusion summoning of the various insect fusions that they have. So if you're here for Moth Mommy, stick around to learn more about the deck and how you should try and play it. As always, we'll start with identifying these new species of bugs and taking note of their various effects. Then we can see what cards work with them symbiotically, and finally we can locate any outside threats, any other monsters that could harm their survivability. Let's begin with the original Delirium monsters. Delirium Papillon, at the cost of changing this monster from attack to defense position, can change a face-up monster on your opponent's field to insect type for the turn. Then if there's another face-up defense position monster in the field, you can draw a card. Next up, we have Delirium Lampiris. If your opponent has two or more monsters on their field, send this face-up card from your field and one monster from your hand to the grave. Then you can take control of one face-up level 5 through 8 monster on your opponent's field with the same type as the monster sent from your hand to the grave. Before, this card wasn't really strong because there was only one other card that you could effectively work with. But now with the expanded list of insects, it's so important to have this card in your deck. The only caveat is the strict requirement, needing 2 or more monsters on the field and at least one of them being level 5 through 8. So just make sure the field is set up properly before you make any mistakes. Speaking of these new bugs, let me introduce a few more of them. These lower level insects all have the ability to turn your opponent's monsters into insects as well, but instead of the duration of just your turn, it applies to your opponent's next turn as well. If you have another face-up light attribute insect type monster on the field, change Delirium Drone from face-up attack position to face-up defense position. Then you can send the top 2 cards of your deck to the graveyard, and one face-up monster on your opponent's field becomes insect type until the end of their next turn. Delirium Mariquita can change from attack to defense position if you have another face-up light insect on your field as well. Then one face-up monster on your opponent's field loses 500 attack and defense for the turn. Also, you can make one face-up monster on your opponent's side become an insect until the end of their next turn. Change Delirium Shuel's position from face-up attack to defense if you have another face-up light insect on the field. Then this allows you to change the battle position of a monster on your opponent's field. Then make a face-up monster on your opponent's field an insect until the end of their next turn too. These monsters all help facilitate the rest of the Delirium cards to activate their effects, and eventually their fusion summons. But here's an interesting piece of tech for you. If you use Papillon's effect and turn a monster to an insect type, you can actually still use Mariquita, Drone, or Shuel's insect changing effect as well, since it's technically a different effect due to the length of time being longer. However, you can't do it in reverse, meaning a monster that has already been turned into an insect by Mariquita, Drone, and Shuel can't have Papillon's effect applied, since just for your turn is a shorter amount than until the end of your opponent's next turn. Anyway, now we can move on to some of the stronger insects in the series. Delirium Calibron is a level 7 light insect that requires you to send the top 3 cards of your deck to the graveyard if you have a light insect there already. Then this card gains 500 attack until the end of the turn, and you can add a Delirium Sylvix from the grave to the hand. Speaking of, Delirium Sylvix is the main monster and the main playmaker of the theme, as in, you need to see this card as soon as possible. You can tribute summon her in attack position by just using one light insect monster. Once she's on the board, you can fusion summon a light attribute insect type monster by sending monsters from your hand or field to the grave as material. It's important to understand that this card does not need to use itself for a fusion summon. You can still use it if you think it's necessary, but with how open your choices are, it's possible to just keep this card in the field and still make stronger cards. If you do send her to the grave as material, fear not. As I already mentioned, Calibron can be used to bring the base Sylvix back to make even more fusions. So then, what are your choices for fusion summons? First up, we have Delirium Larva. Fused using 2 level 6 or lower insect type effect monsters, this card has the continuous effect of giving your face-up insect monsters 800 attack. Also, during your opponent's turn, spell and trap cards on your field can't be returned to the hand, deck, or extra deck by card effects. Fleeting Delirium Sylvix can be fusion summoned using a level 7 through 9 insect monster and 1 insect type effect monster. This card has the continuous effect of preventing your face-up insect type monsters on your field from being destroyed by your opponent's card effects. And as a bonus, your opponent can't use monsters on your field as material for a fusion fusion summon. And if you were curious, since this is a continuous effect, you can still apply effects that prevent card destruction like Sunset Rebirth on them. I mean, no one really uses Sunset Rebirth anymore, but it might help in case your fleeting Delirium Sylvix is removed from the board. And finally, we have Oneirofrenia Delirium Sylvix. This needs exactly 2 level 7 through 9 insect monsters as material for a fusion summon. During the main phase that you fusion summon this card, shuffle 3 non-level 9 insect type monsters from your grave back into your deck. Then this card gains 500 attack until the end of the turn, and you can shuffle a card from your opponent's field back into their deck. It's actually really interesting to see how situational these cards can be. Oneirofrenia Delirium Sylvix is a strong body with the ability to bounce a card to help with tough monsters or potential devastating traps. However, the effect only lasts for 1 turn, so if she stays on the board, you could still use her for another fusion summon if you have the resources for it. Fleeting Delirium Sylvix is almost crucial for the mirror match, as you'll be giving your opponent a swarm of bugs to use for their own fusions. If you can protect your monsters first, you gain the upper hand in battle. And you're probably only summoning larvae in situations where you might want to protect your back row for certain plays. You know, like using important battle traps or placing spells there to open up more room to draw cards next turn. As a little fun fact, according to the official Konami Rush Duel database, cards like Overrush Storm can be activated, but you wouldn't be able to bounce a back row card. So you can still send the 2 cards from your grave to the deck, but because of Larva's protection, you can't do anything else. Which could be helpful in some niche way, but I felt like it was helpful to share. So like always, assess the board state and see what you need to do to gain as much advantage as possible. Thankfully, while Delirium Sylvix is a very important card, there are other supporting cards that can help with facilitating your fusion summons. Delirium Embrace allows you to fusion summon a light insect monster by sending a face-up monster on your field and a face-up level 9 or lower monster from either field to the grave as material. However, you can only attack with insects for the turn. This is why we have the other Delirium insects, basically allowing us to super poly as long as our opponent has an insect monster on their side of the field. And being used as material is not the same as being destroyed or being bounced back by card effects, bypassing all protections outside of them having their own fleeting Delirium Sylvix on their board. Obviously, you're aiming to make your 2 higher level fusions, so do your best to apply the insect changing effects on those monsters while you can. Delirium Honeyed Words is pretty good, but it depends on your deck composition on whether you add it or not. When you play this card, send the top 2 cards of your deck to the grave. Then you can add a light insect, Delirium Embrace, or Delirium Rebirth from among the cards sent. Keywords being among the cards sent, which means you better hope that those 2 cards have something that you need. Now, some people have done the math on this, on whether or not you should add this card, but it really just depends on what style of deck you're playing. If you're playing full light insects, I think it's worth it. But if you have a bunch of other things like staples or something like that that do clutter the deck, your chances of getting something good is going to drop. So just keep that in mind when you deck build. Delirium Rebirth is a trap that activates if you have an insect monster in your grave and your opponent draws a card, or when they normal or special summon a monster during their turn. Then you can fusion summon a light insect monster by sending a face-up monster from your field and a face-up level 9 or lower monster from either field to the grave as material. While this is a cool surprise card, I wouldn't try and run 3 copies in a deck. There really aren't going to be that many opportunities to use this card, since you're probably already using the monsters you turn into insects as material during your own turn. And I think the setup is pretty rough, relying on having any of the new Delirium cards to play first. If we manage to get a card with like a, I don't know, continuous effect to change opponents' monsters to insect types, then we might be talking. But like, what are the chances of us getting that card? And finally, we have the staple, Invitation to a Delirious Dream. What more can I say about this card that hasn't already been said? It's a solid pickup due to its loose requirements and lets you have more material for fusion summons. However, I actually haven't seen a lot of decks run this card, which surprises me. But maybe it's because since you can already fusion using their cards on their field, you don't need to bring more cards onto your side. I don't know. So with all the Delirium related cards out of the way, we can now go to figuring out what kinds of supporting cards can be used with them to help find success. Pinch Hopper lets you special summon an insect type monster from your hand face up on your field if you send this card to the grave. This might be a necessary tool to get your Sylvix or Calibrones from your hand to the board. Polygon Butterfly is a fun card that can help your insects become bigger threats on the field. If you have 3 or more insect type monsters in the grave, send the top card of your deck to the graveyard. Then you can choose a face up level 8 or lower insect monster in your field, give it 200 attack, and it can attack twice this turn. Note that out of all of the Delirium cards, you can't use these on the level 9 fusions, but anything else is fair game. If you need another type changer, Biomech Mantis is another monster you can add. By returning one insect-type monster from your grave into your deck, you can choose a face-up monster on your opponent's field and have it lose 300 attack for the turn. You can then change that monster's type to insect for the turn as well. Princess Ladybug White is a fun burn card if you want to use it. Change this card's battle position to special summon 2 level 4 or lower insect-type monsters from your hand face up to the field. Then your opponent takes 700 damage. Alright, look, not every card's going to be a banger, but it's fun to add some older cards, especially when they do work well with the theme. And I've seen quite a few decks now run Blade Armor King Dynas Dorsus as a secondary powerhouse and removal. If you shuffle 3 monsters from your grave into the deck, you can destroy a face-up level 5 through 8 insect-type monster on your opponent's field. But then, you're locked into attacking with only insect monsters for the turn, which shouldn't be an issue. In my opinion, you don't want to run so many, but 1 or 2 are going to do the trick. But for a fun play, why not run Snake Princess of Purity? When you send the top card of your deck to the grave, you can make a face-up monster on your opponent's field lose attack equal to the number of face-up light monsters on your side of the field times 600 for the turn. Then, if you have 3 face-up monsters on your field, draw a card. And if you really want to cook, Jointech Prime Rex can have the potential to combo into something truly out of this world. Because it's a prime card, it can be tribute summoned with only 1 monster at the cost of reduced attack. If you return 3 light monsters from your grave to this deck, you can make an opponent's level 4 or higher monster lose 3 levels, and you can destroy one of their spell or trap cards. So here's the dream scenario. Your opponent has a level 10 monster that can't be used for any of your Delirium fusions due to its level. You summon one of your low-level Delirium cards to turn it into an insect. Then you can use this card as tribute for Jointech Prime Rex and then lower its level to 7, thus making it usable for your fusion summons with something like a Delirium Embrace. Or you can even use Dynas Dorsus to destroy it, if it doesn't have destruction prevention, of course. Calling Dark Meteor is a new spell card from the Triple Battle Pack that might look like it's just for Meteor Dragon, Red Eye Summon Skull fusions, but it does not state that anywhere in the requirement. All you have to do is shuffle 2 monsters from your graveyard into the deck to destroy a spell or trap on your opponent's field. Then you can special summon a Dark or Fire attribute non-effect fusion monster from your grave face up on the field. Since that last sentence is a then, it means you don't really have to do it. This means you can just use this for back row removal while still getting key cards like your fusions or Sylvix back into your deck to play again. Intruding Beetle is a great card for both back row removal and resource gain. If you have 2 or more insect type monsters in the field, send a card from your hand to the grave. Then you get to draw a card and destroy a spell or trap on your opponent's field. What value! Insect Rampage can provide utility and extra power for your monsters. By shuffling 2 monsters from your grave to the deck, all face-up insect monsters gain 300 attack for the turn. If your opponent has a face-up insect on their field, you can destroy a face-up level 8 or lower monster on their field as well. Threat from Outer Space is an interesting add. At the cost of 1000 life points, you can send the top card of your deck to the graveyard. Then you can set that card onto the field. If it was a monster, special summon it on the field and face down defense. If you special summon a level 2 monster from the grave with this effect, you can destroy a spell trap on your opponent's board. With most of the Delirium low-level monsters being level 2, you actually have a lot of chances to hit. Even if you don't, your other options aren't bad either. Layer Wire is a trap that activates when your opponent normal summons a monster and you place 1 insect-type monster from your grave to the bottom of the deck. Then you can destroy that normal summon monster. This isn't bad to stop a combo early on, as most larger monsters need at least 1 of their monsters on field before they can fusion or tribute summon. So if you can snipe those cards, you can make it harder for your opponent to do anything on their turn. In terms of legend monsters, we don't have any light insects that we can use, but we do have some cards that just synergize really well. The first is Freed the Brave Wanderer, which can destroy a face-up monster with higher attack than this card at the cost of putting 2 light attribute monsters from your grave to the bottom of the deck, which is pretty easy for these light insects. If you need quick removal, I think it works well since you also get cards back. The hardest part is dealing with those high-level monsters that have that monster effect destruction prevention built in, so you could use something like Ryza instead. Obviously, Ryza and Mobius are 2 really good monarchs to throw in, but as an alternative, you could just use Card Trooper to get more cards in the grave to help with other card effects. With legend spells, there's nothing too out of the ordinary here as well, as your main goal will be just to have more resources readily available for your fusion summons. Pot of Greed and Graceful Charity will always be your best bets. However, if you want to do something a little silly, I can highlight the new legend spell of the box, Lightning Vortex. This lets you destroy all face-up monsters on your opponent's field when you send a card from your hand to the grave. It's definitely easy to use compared to something like Dark Hole since your monsters are going to be safe. And, you get a card in the grave as well. And if you really need a fusion from your graveyard, just run Monster Reborn. Legend traps aren't going to be that different either. I've seen people use the Negate War Dragon and Negate Attack combo, but honestly, just use what works. We can, I guess, talk about some of the new trap cards that were introduced though. Drowning Mirror Force is an interesting counter to most card destruction prevention monsters. When an opponent's monster declares a direct attack, shuffle all attack position monsters on your opponent's field back into their deck. Great way to reset the board and gives yourself another chance at a comeback. However, if you want to stick with the classics, Mirror Force and Magic Cylinder will always be your friend. So what might be some of the issues with the Delirium Monsters? Well, what can it do to set 3 pass? Being defensive and not having as many face-up monsters does prevent a lot of the Delirium cards from performing their effects. Thankfully, DUEL does exist, but that's 3 cards in a whole deck to hope to pull early to prevent this from happening. Speaking of DUEL, there's a lot of low levels in the deck, which does increase your chances of bricking with those cards. That's why I suggest adding things like Blade Armor King Dynastorsis just to give yourself more chances of having a play instead of having none. There's also not a lot of play and extension for Delirium. I say this cautiously because maybe you don't even need it. Having the least amount of representation in the triple battle pack means that they didn't have a lot of cards that synergize well with them. A lot of the cards that I mentioned before are great, but not all of them provide the light insect typing that they might need to get their effects off. And on that note, the low-level insects need a second insect on the field to even think about activating, which means any way to remove them early, like a trap hole or just flipping them over with something like Shiny Shady, could really hinder their plans. So there's definitely a lot of potential with the Delirium cards. I think even after the Moth Mommy hype dies down, it can still see some competitive play. Thankfully, there is hope with some future support, but for now, there's not a lot that this deck really does outside of trying to super poly whatever they can. But because the plan is so simple, it's actually a decent deck to jump into. So if you really do want to try it out, here's a few deck lists to get you started. First up is a deck with Blademore King Dynastorsis. Notable adds are Threat from Outer Space for the set card and back row removal, and Curse of the Rising Light for resource gain. This definitely feels more like a going second deck for sure, but at least you have higher opportunities to get stronger monsters on the board. Next up is Snakes, Bugs, and Dinos. Use Snake Princess of Purity, the debuff, and Joytech Prime Rex for the combo I mentioned before. The consistency isn't as good obviously, but it's just a fun deck and good tech pieces to help deal with larger threats on the board. And then finally we have Delirium, but with staples. However, the game plan doesn't change whatsoever. Get the fusions out and hope that it's enough. Other than that, I just added some ways to get resources faster, some extra protection, and some back row removal just in case. And with that, another Rush review is completed. Like I said before, the deck is pretty new, but have some things to work on before being something worth investing more time into. Look forward to the next main set, Galactica of Eternity, for some new support that can help this deck do just a little more. Thank you so very much for watching. If you liked what you saw and want to support me, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave a comment on your thoughts of the deck as well. 2025 is going to be the year of Rush, so I hope you stick around. This is Protagonist signing off for today, and I'll see you all next time. Peace.